The number one thing I did to maximize my efficiency is I did not take... What's up, everybody? Today we're going to talk about the NASM exam. I took the exam in 2023, February to be exact, February 7th to be even more exact. Today I'm going to talk about what was on the exam, how I passed the exam, how I approached the self-guided study process, and also I'm going to talk to you specifically today about how I maximize my time and efficiency to make sure that I pass that exam on the first try. All right, so let's talk about the study process, right? That's the biggest part of this exam. That is the most important part in passing the exam on your first try. So, number one thing, I purchased a self-study guide. I was not willing to spend any more money than I already had to on NASM's course. To be honest, it's quite expensive for someone like me, and I was not able to purchase the more advanced packages or a third-party course. First thing I did, number one, yes, I did read the entire textbook. That is something that I feel helped me to understand the concepts and helped me to really kind of break up what I was studying. There is a lot of information, there is a lot of content, and a lot of specifics in that textbook. And so for me, that's what I did. I read the whole thing. I have heard that not everybody reads the entire textbook, and if you are someone who can understand and navigate your way through a lot of content like that without that structure of the textbook, then that's great. It's probably going to be a lot more beneficial to you to devise your own plan and get through that material in a different way. For me, I read the entire textbook, but I did not take a single note on the textbook, not a single note, and I don't think that it's necessary, and I'll tell you why. The most important thing when you're studying for an exam, especially something as content heavy as the NASM CPT exam, is to active recall. You want to work on your active recall. You want to make sure you know those definitions. You want to make sure you have that base, that solid base that has that foundation. What I did was I read through the entire textbook, chapter by chapter. My personal schedule, if it's helpful, was I read a chapter on Tuesday, a chapter on Thursday, and a chapter on Saturday. In between those days, when I wasn't reading the chapter, I was taking the quizzes over and over again. I was writing down, I was making flashcards out of the questions that I missed, and then I was studying those questions. I was really working on actively recalling that information that I had learned, and that is the way that I maximize my time. And not only that, but I also allowed this NASM studying to not take over my life. That was the most important thing. I still had a job, I still had my own training and my races and everything in between that I was doing in that time. So there was in no way did the NASM exam overtake my life and cause me a ton of stress and overwhelmed feeling, because I was maximizing my time and making sure that I was efficient in what I was doing. So, one day of reading, one day of active recall. One day of reading, one day of active recall. It took me about 3 months to get through the content. Actually, that's a lie. I started December, January, and I took it, so it was about 2 months and a little bit time because I took it on February 7th. I gave myself 2 weeks between the time that I finished the textbook and the date that I took the exam. So that was 2 weeks of actual dedicated studying time. Because I had no notes, what did I study during those 2 times? So first, what I did was I went and took the practice exam on the NASM website. I got an 81 on that first exam. So that was the first clue that my active recall was working, right? I understood the concepts. I could pass the exam, no problem, no studying, just reading and doing the flashcards. That was all I did prior to that first practice exam where I got an 81. From there, I did the same thing. So I took all of the questions I got wrong, stuck them into a flashcard on a Quizlet, and I studied those. From there, I was able to identify the content that I needed to study a little bit more. So a lot of it was going back to the earlier sections, but I definitely prioritized section 5 and 6 because that's about 50% of the exam alone, a little bit more maybe. No, I think it's a little less, but it's a good chunk of the exam. At least like in my head, I always thought of it as 50% of the exam. That is the bulk of the exam. But that does not include underactive muscles. That does not include other concepts that are introduced. For example, in chapter 7, you have a lot of really, really important concepts. So once I was able to identify the concepts that I needed to go over and the concepts that were most important, I was able to then devise a study plan. Chapter 11, extremely important. Chapter 21, OPT model is, I believe, is what's in chapter 21. You also have chapter 11, 12, 13. There's so many chapters in here that are important, and that's why it's beneficial to read the textbook at least somewhat. So what I went through is I went backwards. So I went 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, took all of those section exams. So those are the 50 question section exams, practice exams, I should say. From there, I was able to really identify even further, zoom in and see what concepts I needed to know. And then I went through and did the chapter quizzes. So the chapter quizzes are going to be for chapter 21, chapter 7, all of those really important chapters, and making sure that I knew that content. One thing that I will say is on the practice exam, you're going to see questions from all 6 sections. The thing about taking the actual exam is you will not see a question about nutrition because it's out of a CPT's scope of practice. They're not really legally allowed to ask you questions about nutrition because you're not going to really be using that as a CPT. So they will not ask you those questions, but those will be on the practice exam. So keep that in mind. If you keep missing questions about nutrition, like specific nutrition, just know those will not be on the exam. But what will be on the exams are things in terms of like responses about nutrition. So like if you have a client, and these will be on the practice exam as well, this is not a secret. Questions like if you have a client who is asking you to give them nutrition advice and do a meal plan for them, what would be your response within your scope of practice? So then they'll give you a bunch of answers, and the answer is going to be something like, well, I would say, explain to them that that's out of my scope of practice and that I can't provide meal plans, but I can refer you to a nutrition and dietitian, something like that. So kind of those types of responses, that kind of stuff will come up on the exam, or at least it can. And that stuff will also be in your practice exams. Once I got into that window where it was a week before my exam, I started taking that practice exam every other day. Partly it was studying, right? It was actively recalling as I had been doing throughout the entire process. But it also helps to get used to kind of that rhythm of sitting down, reading questions, reading through the answers, that test-taking strategy to make sure that you are not uncomfortable during the exam. You have that kind of muscle memory of sitting down for however long it takes you. The practice exams took me about 45 minutes, and the actual exam took me a little over an hour, just because there were more questions on the real exam and I was nervous, so I really wanted to go back over and make sure that I had checked my answers a couple times. Once I started taking those practice exams, I did the same. I just repeated the same process. Made flashcards out of the questions that I missed, reviewed those, identified what topics I needed to go over more, and went back, retook those tests. Here's the thing I will say, I heard a lot of people talking about how they took the quizzes and the practice exams until they got a 90%, and only when they got a 90% or higher did they take the actual exam. That is a good idea. It's a very good idea. It's something that I did not necessarily follow. Though I will say that on all of the section quizzes, those 50 question quizzes, I did make sure I got at least a 90%. Same with the section quizzes, though that one's a bit more frustrating because when you go, or the chapter quizzes, when you go into the chapter quizzes, there's only 10 questions. So if you get 2 wrong, you're down to an 80 already. So I did go through and I made sure that I either got 100% or a 90% on those chapter quizzes. Then I read through some concepts, I watched some YouTube videos. Axiom Fitness I made a whole playlist, and when I was on the bike doing my workout, doing a spin workout, I watched the Axiom videos, I was studying, I was paying attention. I also started to think about the NASM content while I was working out. And I know that almost sounds a little bit obsessive, but here's the thing, it helps me to apply and understand the concepts and physically feel them and visually see them and be able to imagine them in my head. And once I did that, I never missed a single underactive, overactive question on any quiz, any practice exam, nothing. So for me, I did not use any mnemonics to understand the overactive or underactive muscles. I did not memorize anything. All I did was visualize it in my body and move through it. So making sure to truly understand those concepts and going through those things while you're doing your workout. So when I'm doing my strength training, identifying what muscles my coach is having me activate and and all of those things. And then also when I was on the spin bike, when I'm running, okay, what muscles am I using? Is it the deep longitudinal subsystem? Is it the lateral? So, all of those different things, concepts that can seem daunting, especially when you're just sitting there trying to memorize things. It's way better to make sure that you're fully understanding and grasping the concepts. So on the practice exam, the 100-question practice exams, I consistently was getting an 88, and it was really making me angry. I was like, okay, I know the concepts, I know I'm understanding them, but why can I not push myself over to a 90, which is what a lot of people were saying, right? You want a 90 before you take the exam. But I decided that an 88 with the questions rotating, right? You rarely see the same question at least twice in a row. Like, they shuffle through. The practice exam is different every time. So if you're consistently passing in those high 80s or 90s, then you're solid and you're ready to take that exam. All right, so let's talk about the supplements that I use. In addition to the NASM textbook, I also watched YouTube videos. I watched really the only one I watched was Axiom Fitness. That was the only channel that I felt like I really liked, and I felt like I was receiving the information, and I thought that it was great the way it was delivered. A lot of people like, Stand Up Fitness or something like that. In my opinion, just my opinion, that guy has a lot of energy. He's chaotic, and I'll be the first to admit that I'm chaotic too, but that guy, he was too much for me. So I could not relax and get myself to focus when he's moving around, he's taking a shot of whatever, and he's jumping and he's screaming and he's loud, and it just was not a way for me to study. Though a lot of people find him very helpful. So if you do, his content is good. His content is true. There's nothing wrong with his content. I was not able to focus with the amount of energy and the chaos that kind of are in his videos. The other thing I will say, the day before I took the exam, I went through all of the NASM study guide material, went through and made sure that I knew all of the highlighted topics. So they're gonna say on the study guide, very important, in red letters. So make sure that you know those very important concepts. And remember, every NASM exam is gonna be different. So unfortunately, there's no real way to know what you're gonna see on the exam. One concept that was really difficult for me for whatever reason was the heart. I didn't see a single question about the heart on my exam. But I know that a lot of other people have, and that's something you need to study. So just know that, sure, there are gonna be things that you're studying that you won't end up needing on the exam, but they're good to know and they're worth spending your time on, just in case, but also because those things don't go away. You need to know them for your career. If you're building a CPT career, you need to know these concepts. So even if you don't get tested on them for the exam, make sure you know them. I took the exam in a testing center. I just decided that it seemed a little bit stressful to take the exam at home because you had to like clear out your room and they took over your computer and made sure you weren't cheating, and if you moved they might like flag you for cheating or something, and I was just scared. It just made me a little nervous, so I was kind of like, let me just go take it in person. So I took it in person and it was great. The guy checked my CPR card, he checked my ID, and that was it. I sat down at the computer and I took the test. There were only 2 other people in the room with me, so it really wasn't any different than if I had taken it at home. So when I sat down to take the test, I went through and answered all of the questions that I knew right off the bat. Any question that I had to guess or I wasn't sure of, right away I just bookmarked it, which was really nice about this testing center. I don't know if this is at all, like on all the exams, but the testing center that I took it at, you could bookmark them. So if you skipped a question or you weren't sure and you wanted to mark it so that you could go back, you could just bookmark it and then move on. And that was great because after I finished, I got through all 120 questions, I went back and there was a way for me to only go back to my bookmarked questions, so that, because I knew I didn't need to review the ones that I knew right away. So it was really great for checking your work, especially digitally when you can't just see it all in a row, like it's 1 page per question. So it was really good for me to be able to just go back through my bookmarked questions and review the ones that I wasn't sure about and answer the ones that I had skipped. So the best thing about taking the exam, get your results in seconds. As soon as I hit submit, it loaded a new screen and it said passed and it was in green, and I was like, oh, thank God, like we did it. Then they print you off a little paper that says you pass and you get to go home, and it's super exciting. So let's talk about what was on the exam, how it was different from the practice exams, because I heard a lot before I took the exam that they're very different, they're not worded the same, there's nothing like that. And that's somewhat true, but it's not all true. Like, yes, you will see the underactive, overactive questions on both exams. Yes, you will see the questions about altered reciprocal inhibition. You'll see those OPT model questions. You'll see those basic questions. And that is, yes, it's worded a little bit differently, but it's the same question at the end of the day. There's only so many ways to word those questions. One thing that is really important when going into the exam in terms of wording as well is really knowing where all the muscles are. So for example, on the exam, it's going to be like about application. And so a question might be like, oh, if you have a client who has a tight like TFL, where would you put the foam roller? And so you're going to have to know where the TFL is. And if you don't know where it is, you're not going to get the answer right, because all of the answers are going to be random parts of the body and there's really only one answer. So making sure that you know that it's right here, then you'll know where to place that foam roller, because the options are only going to be right there. And then other answers are going to be like on the shoulder or on the hip flexor or on the calf muscles, and you're going to know that that's not where it is because the TFL is only in one spot. So things like that is going to be more about application, but you're still going to need to know the basics. And for that reason, the practice test is very, very important, because the practice test is going to help you make sure that you know all of those basic concepts and have a good foundation. Remember that the exam has 20 questions that will not count for or against you. So if you see a question, you're like, what? Like, where was that in the textbook? Why? Like, this is new to me, or like, this is a concept that's not making a lot of sense to me, or something like that. Remember, there are 20 questions that do not count. And most likely that's one of them. I had a few questions where I was like, what? I do not remember that in the textbook. And majority of all of the other questions I at least recognized. Even if I didn't know the answer right away or I had to guess, I recognized the terminology, the content, but there were a few in there that I was like, where even was that in the textbook? Like, where would that fit in? And so you kind of can have a clue there that no need to stress. Like, that's probably one of the ones that they're testing out and that doesn't count. Lastly, the two most questions that I got were about the stages of change: pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance, that kind of stuff, and overactive, underactive muscles. A ton of questions about those two concepts. So that is all I have for you today. I took the NASM exam here in 2023, so feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Feel free to comment down below and I will do my best to answer them. I think that the best things that I did: read the textbook, don't take notes, no need to waste your time, focus on active recall, and really focus on those practice exams. Check out those Axiom Fitness videos, or really any videos on YouTube. There's a ton about NASM that are all great. Really make sure that you're applying the concepts. That is the most important thing, not just memorizing, because when you're nervous, you might forget, and you don't want to leave any room for that. So thank you for watching. I hope this was helpful, and be sure to leave a comment down below if you have a question. Drop a like if you enjoyed this video when you found it and you thought it was helpful, and make sure to subscribe. I'm going to be posting more content as I really start my CPT journey. And of course, I'm always training for triathlon. I'm always running races. So I look forward to seeing you in the future, and be sure to subscribe.